Hello, good afternoon. The government is holding urgent talks with the energy industry about a sharp increase in wholesale gas prices, which have risen to record levels. There are warnings that the increase will raise consumer energy costs and other prices. It's already affecting food production and agriculture. The rising cost of wholesale gas prices is being driven by several factors, including strong global demand. Our business correspondent Katie Austin has more.
Gas is a key source of the energy that helps to heat our homes and power our industries. But reasons including high demand and lower solar and wind output have seen wholesale prices soar, almost doubling since the start of this year. It's an unprecedented situation, according to energy market analysts.
Gas prices around the world, in Asia and Europe, are at record highs. In Europe, there is a big supply squeeze. What is happening here in Great Britain is not unique.
The high prices have already led two large UK fertiliser plants to close. One consequence of that is a nationwide shortage of carbon dioxide. That's the gas used to stun some animals before slaughtering and in the meat packaging process. One trade body said this would cause huge problems because it's so widely used.
It's used to extend shelf life through packaging, not just in meat, but on all foods. And at a time when we're struggling because of the haulage shortages in this country to keep the supply chain running, to actually lose shelf life and have a shorter shelf life on the products going onto shelves, this is going to cause even more disruption. So this is a really serious problem for us.
Online food delivery company Ocado has confirmed it has limited stock of some frozen foods because the squeeze on CO2 means it can't get enough dry ice. The trade body, which represents major supermarkets, said the disruption couldn't have come at a worse time following the pressure caused by the lorry driver shortage. There's concern too in the steel industry that things will only get worse.
If they're at this price now, what's it going to be like in the winter? And if it carried on like this, then I'm really fearful of not just the steel sector, but all energy intensive sectors and then downstream operations, because that's what we do. We're at the start of that supply chain. We sell to manufacturers.
The gas price rise is hitting businesses at the moment, but it is likely to feed through to higher bills for consumers. Katie Austin, BBC News.
Our political correspondent Peter Saul is here. So we've got these urgent government talks going on this weekend. How serious is this?
Well, the fact that the Business Secretary, Victoria, has lined up some 20 meetings over this weekend does suggest that there are some pretty serious concerns in Whitehall about this. Kwasi Kwarteng tweeted earlier on to try to address some concerns about supply issues. He said, quote, that he would expect there be no supply emergencies over the winter. There's perhaps little ministers can do about the global volatility in gas prices. And in fact, government sources today keen to put across the point that actually this highlights the fact that we need to rely a little bit more on renewable energy reduce our reliability on fossil fuels. In the short term, what they're looking at doing is helping out some of the smaller energy firms who might be more exposed to that volatility in the global market. But arguably the more pressing issue, as we saw there, is this prospect of food shortages caused by the sudden drop in availability of carbon dioxide. So there are also meetings going on between officials from the Department of Food, Environment, Food and Rural Affairs and food industry bosses too. And they say a number of options are being considered, including the possibility of importing CO2 from overseas.
Thank you very much, Peter. Thank you. A relative of 10 Afghan civilians killed in an American drone strike in Kabul last month says he's glad that the US has accepted its mistake. The brother of the aid worker says he wants compensation and resettlement for the family in a safe country. 7 of the dead were children. He's been talking to our Middle East editor, Jeremy Bowen. And just to let you know, this report does contain details that some of you may find distressing.
This is all that remains of the Toyota Corolla that the Americans tracked for hours as they convinced themselves entirely incorrectly that it was packed with explosives. 5 of the 7 dead children were playing in the car when it was hit. Its owner, Zamari Ahmadi, who they believed wrongly was an Islamic State bomber, had just driven it home from his work with an American aid organization. The survivors have moved out after their terrible loss. They want compensation and resettlement in a safe country.
Yeah, today I want to my message for USA and all people around the world that they are the USA make a big mistake in here and lost a member of our family. That I want to justice, and before also we say that we are innocent people.
This was America's last act of war before it pulled out of Afghanistan, and the decision to fire the missile smacks of panic. And what a legacy. It isn't necessarily the parting shot of the Americans, because they still have the capacity to hit targets from the air. The US relies increasingly on drones. Across the road, the neighbours are still traumatised by what they heard and saw. America's latest deadly blunder shows how dangerous its drone strategy can be for civilians. Jeremy Bowen, BBC News, Kabul.
Travel companies say that holiday bookings have surged since yesterday's announcement that foreign travel rules are being relaxed in England. The travel traffic light system is being replaced with a single red list. Fully vaccinated people will no longer need a pre-departure test before returning from non-red list areas. France is recalling its ambassadors to Australia and the United States for talks in an escalating diplomatic row over a new defence agreement and nuclear submarine deal. On Thursday, the leaders of Australia, the US and the UK announced details of the new security pact, known as AUKUS, scoppering a multi-million-pound agreement France had already made with Australia to supply submarines. As he left his residence earlier, the French ambassador to Australia described the decision as a huge mistake. Our correspondent Hugh Schofield is in Paris. What is the latest then?
Well, I mean, the latest is the recalling of the ambassadors. We already knew that the French reaction was going to be one of fury. We heard Jean-Yves Le Drian, the foreign minister, on Thursday saying it was like a stab in the back. But my reading is that President Macron feels that the message isn't getting through. He fears that in America, Australia, Britain, they take the French reaction to be one of anger over the loss of the contract. The contract, I think, from the French point of view, is the least of it. Yes, there's money at stake, but far more important in French eyes is the loss of face, the humiliation, and the sense that things have been cooked up behind their back. This was a deal arranged between the Americans, the Australians, and the British, three English-speaking nations, without any kind of consultation with France, who, they insist, are, after all, a nation with a stake in the Pacific region because they have territory out there in Polynesia and New Caledonia. There's a huge degree of anger, and the recall of the ambassadors, though not significantly the British ambassador, is meant to reinforce this feeling that France is very unhappy, fears that there's a new world order being sorted out behind its back in which it has no part.
Thank you very much. Hugh Schofield in Paris. The BBC has refused to comment on reports that 2 of this year's Strictly Come Dancing professional dancers have not been vaccinated against COVID, and that celebrity contestants are reluctant to be paired with them. The broadcaster says the production of the latest series, which starts tonight on BBC One, has followed strict government guidelines to ensure the safety of everyone on the show. Students in the UK who are not yet vaccinated are being urged to get their COVID jab during Freshers' Week. Dozens of universities have set up pop-up clinics and walk-in centres as the new academic year begins. Megan Patterson has more.
Have you registered with a GP?
A new addition to the usual Freshers' Week festivities at Oxford Brookes University.
Make sure we've got 0.3.
Pop-up clinics and grab-a-jab drop-ins, all aimed at encouraging as many students as possible to get vaccinated amid some concern about COVID spread in young people.
We are aware just before the summer there was quite a high increase in COVID infection rates amongst the 18 to 24-year-olds, so we're really keen to try and sort of capture them just as they're coming back to university, to make sure in the environment they live in, maybe in shared houses, that we minimise the spread and the transmission of COVID as much as possible. Obviously we want people to really enjoy their university terms, and so it's to really make it possible for them to do that.
In England, 72% of young people aged between 18 and 24 have already had their first jab. Among them is Holly, now waiting for her second. It's as much about her own freedom as protecting others.
Socialising with other people, I would like to be vaccinated. and eventually I'd like to be able to go on holiday. I'm worried about family members getting it as well because they've got to go to work and all of those things, so financially they need to be able to go off to work, so it's important for me to get it as well.
Thank you for coming.
With so much disruption to college and university terms last year, it's hoped increased vaccination will keep students well and return face-to-face teaching as the norm.
We do want to have students back on campus, but we want them to feel safe. We want everyone in the university community to feel safe. I think the first thing that we're really focusing on with all students is do take the opportunity to get vaccinated. We know that vaccinations are the best protection that individuals can take. It's the best protection for the university community as a whole.
Many universities will still ask students to wear masks and will manage timetables to avoid overcrowding. NHS teams hopeful that, coupled with increased vaccination, will not only maximise student enjoyment, but also reduce pressure on services as we approach the winter months. Megan Patterson, BBC News.
And that's all for now. You can see more on all of today's stories on the BBC News channel. The next news on BBC One is 5:10. Have a lovely afternoon.